Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with my personal rankings for US specializations available in Broken Arrow. Now, every single specialization does have its own role, and all of them can be useful one way or another, but given the way things are working right now in multiplayer, I do believe that some are just better than others in terms of recon capability, helicopter capability, aviation capability. Those kind of things do matter quite a bit right now, especially for the United States. So with that in mind, at number 5, we have the US Armored Brigade. Now, the US Armored Brigade has a lot of armored vehicles, but they are lacking in a lot of other respects, including in terms of air defenses, because yes, they do have the Patriot Pack 2, but the Patriot Pack 3 does exist, and it's just better. They do have air defense, but they are lacking in quite a few ways. They don't have good recon. They have cavalry scouts, they have a bunch of vehicles, but it's much better to have infantry, drones, and helicopters for the sake of reconnaissance. They're just going to be able to do a better job. They're going to be detected less. Like, yes, a Bradley recon vehicle is a really great armored vehicle, undeniably so. You put Iron Fist Active Protection on the A4 CFV, it's going to do a pretty great job when you're looking at having an armor vehicle. But the only really solid recon unit you have are cavalry scouts. So they're not snipers, they don't have the greatest detection range. None of these vehicles do have a great detection range. In fact, I would dare say that from a recon perspective, the units that the Armored Brigade does have available are better suited in a lot of different ways for direct combat as opposed to actual reconnaissance. That's my personal perspective on that subject. Or in some other respects, like for instance, having a Fist V, which can use a laser designator, not something to be ignored when you're thinking about various capabilities. But the Armored Brigade mainly focuses on tanks and artillery. But there's different artillery options available. I'd say the most useful thing, though, is obviously the Iron Thunder artillery option, to be sure. In terms of AA options, you do have the Linebacker, you do have the Patriot, you do have MLRS, so you do have some really good artillery, but you don't really have the best air defenses as I see it, and because you're lacking planes, helicopters, you're lacking in recon, and your infantry is not really that great. Like, you look at mechanized engineers, you look at mechanized riflemen, they don't compare to the other infantry options that the United States has available to them. Some decent things to be sure over here, but right now the vehicle meta does have certain issues, and just that lack of recon, that lack of air power is going to hurt the Armor Brigade quite a bit. At number 4, we have the Stryker Cav Regiment. Now, the Stryker Cav Regiment does have air power, and some things here can be very useful, but here's the thing. While you do have some really great units right here, like the Stryker RV, you do have Predator drones, you do have Shadows. Like Shadows in particular, very cheap drone, and kind of protected because of how it flies. So good unit from that point of view, but it's still limited. And as for artillery options, when you're looking at the self-propelled howitzers of the Stryker Cav Regiment, it's just not going to have that same kind of capability as other artillery options. On the flip side, however, you probably have the best air defenses in the game in a lot of ways. So you have Centurion C-Rams, you have Patriot Pack 3s and Pack 3 MSEs. So having both versions of the Pack 3 is a bit ridiculous over here. You do have HIMARS, you do have mortars as well. So you do have capability. You do have Strykers with SHORAD, which can be really good because you do have a lot of Stinger missiles. You also have radar on these. You can have a trophy on these. So really solid capability all around over there. But still, various problems, I would say, in other respects. Infantry is better than when you're thinking with the Armor Brigade, but still not really the best. And when we're thinking about planes, I would say that when you're looking at the B-52, the B-1B is better because it just has It just has greater speed. B-52 can carry a lot more missiles, but it's going to be a bigger target. And then you look at the F-16s. The F-16s for air-to-air capability, they're nowhere near comparable to the other planes that are available for the United States and Special Forces and the Marine Corps in Airborne. In Airborne, they're not quite as good. The one advantage that the United States does have in terms of their planes is specifically with the F-16CJ, because the CJ does have those 4 harm missiles that you can install on it. So you do have seed capability. That's pretty useful and something that shouldn't be ignored and can work well with other decks. But I would say that the Stryker Cav Regiment is more useful to support frontline combat capability of other decks. And they lack helicopters, which is not something that should be ignored with respect to what is powerful right now. Because helicopters, they do give you transport capability, they do give you that kind of air mobility capability, moving supplies around the battlefield faster. So that kind of stuff is pretty useful. But on the flip side, it is better than the Armored Brigade because you're going to get things in recon, you're going to get things with planes, you're going to get things with artillery, you're going to get things with support. Lacking helicopters, yeah, that is going to hurt it. At number 3, we have the Airborne Infantry. I was tempted to put these guys at number 2, but there are several reasons behind that. Basically, many of the things that Airborne Infantry can do, though not all of them, to be certain on this, but many of the things that Airborne Infantry can do, Special Forces can do better. Like infantry-wise, like you think about Airborne Infantry, right? Think of it from this perspective. If you're going to have airborne infantry, you actually want to drop things with planes, right? So you do have really, really good planes in a lot of ways with airborne infantry. The capability that these guys do provide is just amazing. Like C-17s are ridiculously good to drop airborne infantry. The problem is the actual airborne infantry itself that this specialization has is not necessarily that great, at least in terms of dropping them right on a point or close enough to a point and then having them fight it out with enemy units. They're not going to do a great job in that respect. They can help other infantry, or they can help transport infantry from other decks, from other specializations, but they are going to be lacking in that respect. On the flip side, while their infantry isn't good, pretty much everything else that they do have can be downright ridiculously amazing in certain respects. Like Brutus as an artillery option is very cheap but still fairly effective. You look at guided rounds, cluster rounds, you name it, they've got a good amount of capability. Smoke rounds. So that is a pretty solid level of capability as well. And these things can be transport, can be airdropped. So that's not something to ignore. Hawkeye, not necessarily the best, but still just that kind of mobility that they do provide can be pretty useful. Slam rams, you do have AIM 120s or AIM 9, so you do have some decent, not great, but you do have some decent level of air defense capability right here with these guys. You have transport trucks, you do have helicopters. Kiowa Warriors for recon purposes and for the sake of dealing with enemy air because they can install Stinger missiles can be pretty solid in that role. And then you also have to consider things like Blackhawks, Apache longbows. So there is a decent level of capability. I would say, however, that their Global Hawks, I think in certain ways they're better than Special Forces because they have a greater flexibility. But their units individually are not necessarily as great as some other things, with some exception. Like B-1Bs, and most of those exceptions are actually going to come in terms of air power. So you do have the B-1B Lancers, great capability in terms of their speed, in terms of their altitude drop. You can drop a lot of cruise missiles with this thing, 24 JSSMs or 8 AGMs with the B-1B and then get out. That survivability, EX Eagle 2s have one of the most ridiculous air-to-air capability in the game because they just can fire a lot of missiles very quickly. And then you do have F-15s and F-15 Strike Eagles for, either air-to-air or air-to-ground combat capability, A-10s. You do lack in certain ways, specifically your inability of doing seed missions, which you would think that they should have that capability, but they don't. And that's rather unfortunate, but yes, you do have some really good stuff over here. So say 17, B1B, Eagle 2 in particular. Global Hawk is pretty solid, but Special Forces just have a much better recon drone than Global Hawk. But still, can get the job done. There's some good stuff in here, I wouldn't dispute that, but there's better stuff in Special Forces. But they do have a greater, in terms of ability of standing on their own, Airborne Infantry can stand on their own better than most other decks in the game right now. Then we have the U.S. Marine Corps. Now, the chief benefit of the U.S. Marine Corps is if we look at Army Builder, right, and we look at different specialization, what I really like about the USMC is they mesh well with a lot of different specializations, because they have kind of a bit of everything, except drones. So they're lacking in terms of recon drones. Absolutely, that is an issue, but they do have scout snipers, they do have force recon capability in terms of scouting capability. I'd say the main downside of the USMC is with regard to their support vehicle. So they're not going to have great air defenses, like, yes, LAVAD's decent enough, but not great. Artillery options, not really fantastic, though Dragonfires shouldn't be underestimated because of their smoke or damage against units, or infantry specifically. But with respect to the USMC, here's the reason why I think they're so great. So they have that kind of capability in different roles. You can mesh them well with many different decks one way, or help alleviate some of the concerns. Like the one deck I would probably not put them with together would be the Armored Brigade, but outside of that, they can work quite well with others because of the capabilities that they do provide. So they do have Abrams. Very important. And Abrams with trophy active protection over here, so you do have the M1A1 FEP trophy. Not something to be ignored with regards to their capability. Vipers, pretty good attack helicopters. Not the strongest, not the most durable, but quite very importantly, they have sidearms. So they have anti-radiation missiles installed on them, or they have air-to-air missiles installed on them. Then you have, you can consider Super Cobras, who can either have sidearms or sidewinders installed on them if you do want that capability on these helicopters. So whether or not you want the capability to deal with enemy air defenses or you want the capability of dealing with enemy helicopters, they do provide that. Harriers can be pretty good in terms of just going after enemy helicopters in certain ways, especially because of their cheap cost. And then you have the EA-6B Prowler, the only pure electronic warfare plane, I think, in the entire game right now. So Prowlers, the F-16 CJ can carry as many missiles, and it's just a better plane overall. But the benefit of Prowlers, like if we compare a Prowler to an F-16 CJ, right, in terms of the capability, well, it is just going to be a more expensive plane to get an F-16 CJ, right? It's a faster plane, it's a more capable plane, but Prowlers are just that cheap option to deal with enemy air defense. So you bring a bunch of these Prowlers, they're going to do or you bring two of these Prowlers, they're going to do some level of damage against enemy air defenses, which can open the way for a lot of different things. You do have a transport plane, which is not something to be ignored in terms of the kind of capability that these guys do provide. You have the Marine Raiders close quarter combat infantry, which are really great if you drop them from a plane, specifically because they're really, really good at shooting, at taking out units and buildings from a distance. You don't want to send them directly in a building, but they do have that capability of just with those 4-shot guns, with those grenade launchers, they do have that kind of capability of just, oh, there's an enemy unit right next to me in a building right next to me. They don't have flashbangs, but they're pretty good all the same, like fairly durable, lots of units inside the lots of models inside the Marine Raiders. Then you consider the F-18C. Like, it's not going to compare to a Strike Eagle, but very importantly, you do have the Gunslinger missiles, which are fairly long-range missiles. Then, of course, you do have your AMRAAMs. You can install a decent number of AMRAAMs on this thing. So you do have a pretty good, solid level of long-range and even shorter-range capability on F-15C Hornets. In some ways, there's benefits, obviously, with the Eagle 2. There's benefits with F-22, but there's quite a few benefits. Like, you are not going to be lacking in terms of air power if you're playing the USMC. And that is one of the reasons. Like, you have helicopters, you have Ospreys. So those are very useful. You have tanks. So if you're playing, Marines with Airborne, for instance, or Special Forces, they can bring you some tank capability. I mean, especially like when you think about the Airborne, like Airborne does have tanks. So the M8, really, really good tank. I should have mentioned that, but really good tank, very cheap. But it's not a heavy tank. It's more of a raiding tank. But then when you consider the fact that you can combine USMC with Airborne, you kind of get the crazy capability because you can get M1A1 FEPs with trophy, and then you also have active protection on those M8s. That is a good amount of capability. They're lacking in air defenses. I'd say the biggest problem that the Marine Corps has is that they're lacking in air defenses, but you can make up for that with other specializations when you're building a deck. And finally, at number 1, we obviously have Special Operations Forces. Now, Special Operations are focused on air power, helicopter, infantry, and, drones. So they're really good at recon. I think they're probably the best specialization in the game right now in terms of recon capability, just because of the RQ-170. I admit, when I first started playing the game, I didn't quite realize just how much this damn drone would matter in a game. So basically, I underestimated how important that stealth capability was going to be. Because not only does the RQ-170 have really good detection range, but because itself, it's actually harder to shoot down than many other things. Yes, people can turn on active radars on S-300s or Patriots and take them down, but they do have that level of protection inherent to them. And that level of protection is going to show itself in a lot of different aspects with regards to their air power. So you have the B-2 Spirit. Now, the B-2 Spirit doesn't have the same agility as the B-1B, but if you're firing a lot of missiles with this, it might have a great level of survivability with firing a bunch of AGMs compared to other planes. Or you can just drop nukes on people. That's a very popular option. Why not? Then you have the F-117. So F-117s, pretty good planes from the perspective of just bringing 2 of these, dropping 4 cruise missiles, getting out, not losing the plane in the process, which is a bit sketchy with a lot of different other planes that try to do that. So F-117s, yeah, they're not the cheapest in the world, but they do have that kind of level of capability. AC-130, if you really completely obliterate enemy air defenses or you're successful in siege. Not the best transport plane with the MC-130, so like the C-17 is a better plane, but you can always combine the two. F-22, stealth capability, long-range missile capability with AIM-260s. Really good from that perspective. You have Little Birds as small, agile transport helicopters, but they also have a decent enough scouting capability. It's just small, cheap. You don't care if you lose 100 of these throughout the course of a match. But then you have Killer Eggs, which have Stinger missiles installed in them, which, yeah, I wouldn't ignore that. Although some people may prefer to actually go with miniguns and just close in the range against enemy helicopters to do some damage. And it's not even that. You look at the Black Hawk DAP. Well, the Black Hawk DAP does have 2 autocannons and has 4 Stinger missiles. So, and it's more durable than obviously a Killer Egg helicopter. Doesn't have it does have pretty good capability in its own right. Doesn't have the same low cost, but still pretty decent capability in that respect. Then you have Comanche helicopters to take a look at, or Guardians. So you have stealth capability on helicopters with the potential of having a decent amount of Hellfire missiles or a decent amount of Stinger missiles on it. Personally, I prefer to install Hellfire missiles, just ambush tanks, because that's one of the things helicopters can do. Or you can go with Apache Guardians, far more durable. They have ECM, so they're going to be more easily detected. But then on top of that, you have some of the most ridiculous infantry units, if not the best infantry units in the game. So for building clearing, you do have deltas. Deltas are very durable. You send these guys in a building against many units, even if they're outnumbered, they'll be able to do it between the flashbangs and the shotguns that they do carry. You can go for standoff capability with them, but I prefer that. Green Berets with flash specifically, they basically leave a pool of fire, so they can kind of kite enemy infantry units in that and kill them, or kill them in buildings. Pararescue or STTs. Personally, I prefer STT for the Stinger capability. I mean, Ranger Stingers, let's compare this. Ranger Stingers still also only have one Stinger. They're 20 points less, sure, but I would vastly prefer having STTs. Like, I really like using STTs in a match. Like, they do have pretty good stealth capability for infantry. They can ambush enemy helicopters. Green Berets have great stealth capability, so you have some really nasty stuff. The Rangers Mark 47 automatic range launcher, or probably the best anti-tank weapon in the game on an infantry unit, which is the Ranger M4 Carl Gustav. 3 of these on a unit, good amount of ammunition, and crucially, they fire very fast. So you'll overwhelm any kind of active protection system that an enemy tank will have. Yeah, don't underestimate the MAW, let's say, or the Carl Gustav, basically. The Swedes know how to make them. That's all you need to know. So infantry capability, helicopter capability, recon capability. It kind of feels like playing with cheat codes to an extent when you're really properly using the RQ-170. So just a ridiculous level of capability with regard to special forces. Obviously, themselves, they are lacking in terms of artillery and vehicles and all that, but pretty much everyone else has that capability to a degree or another. And let me just say it like this. Dropping 1,000 points of Delta Forces, Green Berets, and Rangers on top of an enemy objective, they're going to do damage in that. And they're not going to be easy for an enemy to take out. And even if they do get taken out, congrats, you've just provided such a distraction that if your team is on the ball, they'll go in and push a flank because the enemy's panicking, they've flipped out, they've panicked, they've lost control. And you also have MATVs with Javelins Mark 90. So glass cannon unit, but you do have a freaking Javelin missile on a light armored vehicle. A very light armored vehicle. Not the greatest defensive capability, but still pretty high level of damage there if you can actually use those Javelins. So all around, in terms of how the game is played right now, I do think Special Forces win out. Costin, signing out. Stay tuned for more.